It's my nerd world, and welcome to it. This week on the show, the full Ahsoka trailer drops. I'll share my thoughts and rumors and speculation. Plus, Iger stays with Disney, says they're going to slow down Star Wars content, Lucasfilm content, Marvel content again. How much slower can you get? I'll explain. Plus, Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning review. Had a chance to see it yesterday. Fantastic film. Can't wait to share my thoughts about the latest installment of the Tom Cruise series and your listener feedback this week.
Nothing will stand in our way.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
I will finish what you started.
Who are you? I'm no one.
There are stories about what happened.
It's true. All of it.
The Force. It's calling to you.
My nerd world.
Just let it in.
It is my nerd world. I'm your host, Jon Justice. Thanks for checking out another episode this week. I mistakenly went and muted my mic. As I mentioned on the show this week, we'll get into the Ahsoka trailer, Mission Impossible as well, listener feedback. Let's start off here, though, in the show. Disney pulling back on making Marvel, Star Wars content, says Bob Iger. Now, Bob Iger has recently signed yet another extension after his return, replacing Bob Chapek after a rather short period of time of him leading the Disney creative portion as the CEO. Well, all things Disney, obviously, but we're talking specifically about Star Wars and the Marvel Universe. Disney is slowing down, though, according to an article from MSNBC, when it comes to making movies and TV series for its Marvel Studios and Lucasfilm franchises, according to CEO Bob Iger. Now, he said this not too long ago as well. And I have my speculation on what this actually means. It says the move comes as the company is looking to cut costs during a time when its recent films, Marvel to animation, have underwhelmed at the box office. On the Lucasfilm front, there hasn't been a Star Wars film in theaters since 2019, and the company has focused primarily on their live-action series, such as the Emmy nominees Andor, Obi-Wan Kenobi for Disney+, Lucasfilm's Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, which did not perform well at the box office. And it's an interesting comparison, in my view, when you look at Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny and compare it to a film like Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning, and I'll get into that in just a moment. That, of course, is the fifth film in that franchise, as underwhelmed, as the article says, of what I just mentioned at the box office, despite a plum release date around the 4th of July. Still, similar to Marvel, Lucasfilm has provided a well of revenue for Disney. The company bought Lucasfilm in 2012 for about $4 billion and recouped its investment in just 6 years after a lucrative new trilogy of films, along with standalone films like Rogue One. So what does this mean for Star Wars? Well, and Marvel too, for that matter, since I've kind of expanded the podcast beyond Star Wars. Let's talk about Star Wars first. The live-action shows have proved pretty popular. I've made my views and opinions of Obi-Wan Kenobi and the Book of Boba Fett very clear. Andor, of course, has been successful. We've got Ahsoka coming out in the trailer that I'll talk about here in just a moment. But beyond that, and what they have laid out so far in terms of upcoming releases, I expect that those will stay. Meaning, we'll get maybe Ahsoka Season 2. That's been a bit of a question mark, though. My understanding of the end of the Ahsoka series is that, from the rumors that I've read, and this is not spoilers, but that there is a possibility they could just do one season, and it could roll into the Dave Filoni Mandoverse film that is on the slate, along with the The Rise of Skywalker movie and the James Mangold Dawn of the Jedi, if you will, film that's supposed to take place, tens of thousands of years prior to the events of the High Republic and the prequel trilogy. Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny not performing very well, though, could undermine that possibility, especially given Bob Iger's comments. I mean, we haven't had a Star Wars film in theaters, as it's mentioned, since 2019. If the slate still plays out the way it's supposed to, we're looking at 6 to 7 years until we'll actually get one once one hits the big screen. I can't imagine Lucasfilm, Disney waiting that long to get a Star Wars film in theaters, but I could certainly see the slate changing in the wake of the lackluster performance of Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, and to a lesser extent, the lack of buzz around Star Wars at the moment. Now, I was very impressed with the Ahsoka trailer. I'll share with you my thoughts on that in just a moment. I have high expectations for that show, and I was trepidatious at first because of my disappointment with Obi-Wan Kenobi. Mando Season 3 was good. Certainly wasn't groundbreaking by any stretch. It had some fantastic moments, but I also thought some aspects of it were not as good as the first season. Okay. Be that as it may, I still enjoyed it quite a bit. But there has just been, in my view, a bit of a lull when it comes to Star Wars. And when you get a film like Top Gun Maverick, and we just happen to be talking about two Tom Cruise movies because, in my opinion, they have really been at the top of the list in terms of fantastic storytelling on the big screen. But when you look at Top Gun Maverick, and certainly, in my view, Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning, you compare them to a film like Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, and I absolutely enjoyed and had more fun watching the Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning film than I did Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. If I had to choose, I probably would go, like, I want to go back to the theater right now and go see Dead Reckoning, whereas Indiana Jones, I don't have that big of a desire to do so. And what's interesting is the movies are trying to accomplish similar goals. They're trying to entertain and have some emotional weight to them at the same time. And Dead Reckoning just did it so much better than Indiana Jones did. And certainly better than a more comparable film like Fast X. I'm getting ahead of myself here. But ultimately what I'm trying to say is it comes down to the storytelling and the way that the action scenes are constructed. And I feel like that at the moment, the Lucasfilm isn't on its game. Star Wars hasn't been on its game. And we've seen other franchises that have been doing it better. And I can't really, and I haven't spent a ton of time on why that is. And it's all subjective. I'm sure there is you listening that may completely disagree with me of my analysis of those films, and that's totally fine because, again, art is subjective. We all have different views, and we're struck emotionally differently. I just feel that the storytelling in those other films via, whether it's Top Gun Maverick or whether it's Dead Reckoning, has just been much better than what I've seen, certainly in a film like Fast X, and I'll talk more about that more, but also Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, which is a film that I, enjoyed quite a bit. I will absolutely own the Blu-ray. I will be rewatching it as well. But in terms of the amount of fun and enjoyment and emotional and emotions that I felt in the movie theater, I hadn't really felt that since Top Gun Maverick going and seeing Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning. Whether or not this means that those films that Kathleen Kennedy has announced that I just mentioned a moment ago get put on the back burner, it seems odd if that would happen after so much commentary around those films. But at this point, Lucasfilm and Disney have been known for pulling the plug on this stuff. And with Bob Iger signing on more time, these could be new comments and a new directive, and perhaps part of the reason why Bob Iger decided that he was going to go ahead and sign on for more time, saying, if I'm going to do this, for example, I think things should be done in a certain way. When it comes to the Marvel content, too, I mean, what I was saying in terms of storytelling and movies hitting the emotional hotspots, those films have just been off the mark, in my opinion. We watched the first 2 episodes of Secret Invasion, and I enjoyed them, but I haven't watched the next 2. They didn't stick with me. I wasn't bored watching them. I thought they were good enough, but none of us in the house, we all kind of forgot. We're like, oh yeah, I forgot we have a new Secret Invasion Marvel show. And that wasn't like that in those first several phases leading up to And the films leading up to Endgame. Everything after Endgame just has really been falling flat, including the live-action shows. I haven't gone back and watched any of the Marvel the Marvel live-action shows since their first release. I thought they were okay, and I enjoyed them when I first saw them, but it's not something that I would look at and say that's rewatchable. And that's usually where I gauge, in my opinion, again, my subjective view, my enjoyment of a particular product is how rewatchable is it. Now, that being said, I have gone back and rewatched the Star Wars content, and certainly, and more specifically, The Mandalorian, all 3 seasons, more so than I have Book of Boba Fett, or Obi-Wan Kenobi, and I've only gone through a full rewatch of Andor once, even though I watched every episode a few times. All right, let's get to the other big Star Wars news, and some positivity in my opinion, and that is the release of the full Ahsoka trailer.
This is not going to go the way you think.
After watching the trailer twice, I tweeted out, "Please let this be as good as it looks." I believe it's going to be as good as it looks, for one reason and one reason only, and that is Dave Filoni. This appears to be the next season of Rebels, and Rebels, in my opinion, is some of the best Star Wars storytelling out there. While the quality of the animation isn't as good as what we got in Clone Wars, it was certainly different by design, but it wasn't as good. The storytelling in Rebels is just fantastic Star Wars storytelling. I trust in Dave Filoni. And what we've seen in terms of this trailer, I think we're in for a very good series. Something on par with The Mandalorian, if not better. The production quality aspect of it is the only question mark that I have, because I don't feel like the live-action shows, apart from Andor, have really stuck the landing on that front. But if they give Ahsoka at least as good of quality as what we've seen in The Mandalorian, I think we'll be all right. So the trailer opens up with a startling act by Baylan Skoll. He's a red lightsaber-wielding antagonist whose ultimate intentions are not yet known. "We are no Jedi," he says, before stabbing an individual. We also get our first look at Thrawn, who Ahsoka believes is planning his return as heir to the Empire, as well as Ezra Bridger. Now, we've only seen him via the recorded message in holograph form. Certainly sounds like him in a repeat of the message that he left in Rebels. We'll talk more about that in a moment from an article from Den of Geek. The trailer features, of course, General Hera Syndulla, played by Mary Elizabeth Winstead, one of my favorite Star Wars characters ever, and certainly my favorite character of Rebels, both in the cockpit of the Ghost and addressing the New Republic, including Mon Mothma, played by Genevieve O'Reilly, reprising her role once again, most recently from Andor. Giving an impassioned plea as it relates to joining the rebellion, the fear of another war on the horizon. We also come to understand more about the strained master and apprentice relationship between Ahsoka and Sabine Wren. Ahsoka says, "Anakin never finished my training. I walked away from him just like I walked away from Sabine." It all ends with a look more of exciting teases of what's to come in the epic series, according to some notes from StarWars.com. Den of Geek went a little bit further, and I wanted to share with you some of their thoughts. I love all the characters from Rebels, and Sabine is also a fantastic character. And while Natasha Liu Bordizzo, who plays the live-action version of Sabine, certainly fits the role, I think, visually of what Sabine looks like, I was wondering how she was going to carry the character in live-action. And so far, from the little bits that we've seen in the trailer, she's matching the cartoon pretty well. It's going to be different, obviously. Different voice actress. They're going to emote differently. But Sabine certainly had a very particular and distinct style in Rebels, and it seems like this actress is going to be bringing her own distinct style while still keeping in the spirit of the cartoon version of Sabine. Probably more so than what we've seen of Rosario Dawson versus the animated version of Ahsoka. And that's not necessarily a dig at all. I think Ashley Eckstein, who voiced Ahsoka in the animated series, did a fantastic job. Rosario Dawson gives a much different energy. I'm a bit taken out when I see the live-action Ahsoka because she doesn't quite have the same type of spunk for lack of a better word, that Ashley Eckstein and the animated version of Ahsoka gave. But I do very much like Rosario Dawson's performance. It is just kind of a different version of the Ahsoka that I became so used to in watching Clone Wars and Rebels. So, Den of Geek goes on to say, talking about some of the details of the trailer, most of the moments are eclipsed by one of the most unexpected twists yet revealed by the show's marketing. In the new trailer, Sabine calls Ahsoka Master, and later we see her dueling with Shin Hati with a lightsaber. This is one of the other bad guys, antagonists with those orangish red lightsabers, implying for a time after Rebels that Ahsoka trained Sabine in the ways of the Jedi in Ezra Bridger's absence. Now, longtime Rebel fans know this is not the first time that Sabine has trained under a Jedi. Ezra and his own Jedi Master, Kanan Jarrus, helped her to learn how to wield the Darksaber when the mythical blade came into her possession in the series. Of course, later she gifted that weapon to Bo-Katan, who we know then lost it to Moff Gideon during the Empire's occupation of Mandalore. The Darksaber was ultimately destroyed in the Mandalorian Season 3 finale, but the new Ahsoka trailer reveals that Sabine's skill with blades has only grown since we last saw her in Rebels. Now, this time, she's wielding Ezra's green lightsaber and holding her own against Shin, who is presumably a powerful Force user with a lot more Jedi training under her belt, which leaves us wondering whether there's more Sabine training than the dueling techniques. Although it was established in Rebels that Sabine wasn't Force-sensitive, has this somehow changed in the years between the ending of the animated series and Ahsoka? Or is Ahsoka teasing a journey for Sabine when she learns she can wield the Force after all, just like Finn did in the Star Wars trilogy? If so, this is pure speculation. A twist like that would certainly set the character on a completely new course and a path that could lead her to becoming a Jedi. Now, this would also be very interesting from the standpoint of sort of an establishment of an individual who isn't necessarily Force-sensitive, doing that thing with my fingers, but is able to lean into the Force and end up wielding the Force. Going back to what Luke Skywalker said to Rey in The Last Jedi, right? And some of what we've seen in canon so far, that all you have to do is be able to tap into it. When we look at the possibility of what we could see in the post-Episode 9 film with Rey training a new batch of Jedi, and perhaps the return of John Boyega, as we mentioned in a previous episode, and his burgeoning Force usage that we saw hinted at in The Rise of Skywalker, then maybe this could be a new precedent of an average individual who doesn't really show any signs of being Force sensitive, but is able to dig deep and tap into it and then become a Jedi. The trailer hints that Sabine will certainly try to use the Force to push Sin back during their fight, suggesting the character perhaps knows something about her abilities that we do not. In the scene, Shin mocks Sabine, declaring that the Mandalorian has no power, but is Sabine about to surprise her? Now, the revelation that Ahsoka once trained Sabine also brings about a bit of a conflict to the new series. Maybe. Usually this stuff ends up working out right, but Rebels ended with the duo set to find Ezra, who went missing at the end of the cartoon. We learned that the duo parted ways at some point before finding their friend. In the trailer, Ahsoka says that she walked away from Sabine, which has caused a rift between them. It's unclear, though, how long Ahsoka and Sabine's master was Sabine's master before she left and why she actually walked away. But it does seem like she now regrets the decision. A lot of speculation here, too, and it's tough. These trailers, we can often, we try to pull from them what we think is going on, and then a lot of times it's never what we actually thought it was. The trailer makes it clear that Sabine will eventually rejoin Ahsoka, right? Presumably to resume their mission to find Ezra and take down Thrawn. It also revisits, as I mentioned, Ezra's final message to Sabine from Rebels, which feels particularly significant that Sabine seems to have decided to follow in the footsteps of a Jedi. In the animated series, if you remember, Ezra and Thrawn vanish into unknown space, and the rest of the heroes discover a message he left for them. To Sabine, all Ezra says is, I'm counting on you. Now, at first, she doesn't seem to know what Ezra is counting on her to do, but by the end of the episode, she decided to go off with Ahsoka to find him, implying that this is what he wanted her to do all along. Now, the trailer, we see what looks like another longer version, as I said, of Ezra's message. It's similar, but it provides new context to the farewell. He says, as a Jedi, sometimes you have to make the decision no one else can, but I'm counting on you to see this through. Now, the phrasing could indicate that he wanted her to pursue Jedi training with Ahsoka, and that's what she realizes at the end of Rebels. Now, that would be interesting just from the standpoint of I didn't really get, and I'd have to go back and watch Rebels. I've seen it several times, but it's been a little while. To have Ezra make that plea to Sabine would seem to be a bit out of character with their relationship, in which Sabine was typically more the superior to Ezra. So that seems a little bit off kilter, but that still remains to be seen. A Mandalorian hasn't been a Jedi since the original owner of the Darksaber, a warrior named Tar Vizsla. So the fact that Sabine has undergone training with the Jedi, perhaps not just once, but twice now, is a big deal. Reintroducing Sabine as Ahsoka's apprentice changes the context of the Rebels finale and Sabine's story, if we're getting what we're seeing in the trailer correct. Even if her Mandalorian blood makes it harder for her to tap into the Force, it seems like Ezra may have sensed something within her before he left. It's probably way too soon to call Sabine the first official Mandalorian Jedi of the New Republic era, but she may just give Grogu some competition. And again, this is familiar territory, obviously, for Dave Filoni, and with the focus being on so much on the Mandalorians in the Mandalorian series, we're certainly keeping with that theme a bit with Ahsoka, but we are getting back to the Jedi, the Force, the lore. Sabine being Mandalorian is certainly an aspect to that, but I imagine that the Ahsoka series will be more Jedi-centric than Mandalorian-centric. The look of the trailer is fantastic, and it got me excited where I hadn't been excited for Star Wars in a while. Now, it got me excited on a couple of different fronts. I grabbed a bit of a Brick Fanatics article because I wanted to talk about some of the ships that we saw in the trailer. Brick Fanatics, of course, focusing on Lego, but they do talk about what appears in the trailer. It gives us a clear look of what appears to be the very first on-screen E-Wing starfighter. Now, that was a ship that was originally introduced in the Dark Empire comics of the early 1990s. The E-Wing was decanonized when Disney acquired Lucasfilm in 2012, since appearing very briefly in a single panel of the Poe Dameron comic. But this is the first time that it's popped up proper in the galaxy far, far away. Now, certain members of the Star Wars LEGO community are now convinced that the E-Wing will be paired with the ship glimpsed on the Ghosts LEGO box art, which came out leaked recently, taking a similar approach to the Mandalorian Fang Fighter versus the TIE Interceptor set that was released. And that would tally with the suspected minifigure lineup, which is said to include a pilot and a blue astromech droid. It's also keen to note that Jason Syndulla, this would be the son of the passed away Kanan and Hera that was shown in the Rebels finale, does not have the green hair that he had in the cartoon. So there's going to be some changes in the live-action version of what we saw in Rebels. That one specifically, I imagine that the green hair just wasn't working right on camera. Perhaps he grew out of it as he got older, if he is indeed a little bit older, or they just decided to go ahead and give him brown hair instead. The other thing to note, and I got to give a hat tip to my buddy Zach over at Knights of Vader for pointing this out, because I saw it, knew it looked familiar, but I wasn't 100% sure why it looked familiar, and then he posted on Instagram about this, and this was the reason why it looked familiar. I'm talking about the E-Wing's astromech. Now, it looks like a cross between an R2 unit and BB-8, and it has blue lights. It has a larger main eye, right, that is more akin to what we saw with BB-8. However, it has these two blue lights, and what's funny about the blue lights is that I recognized them because they have these little triangle drops, if you will, design around them, kind of embedded into the dome of the R2 unit. Well, It's the same two lights offset with the indent that, again, is sort of a triangle teardrop shape that we saw in the very first R2-D2 released of the initial action figures. The R2 dome head of the original Star Wars was not the production version of what we saw in the movie. It had a different look to it. The main blue eye was different with those two offset ones, again, with the triangle teardrop shape. I have it. It's sitting here behind me, but it looks different. It's classic in its own right, being vintage, but it does not look like the R2-D2 that we came to know and love from the series. This particular version of this E-Wing astromech has those two similar eyes, and I thought that was a really, really cool nod to the original vintage R2. I'm excited for it. Dave Filoni has done such great work for Star Wars, one of the best. I even consider him better than Jon Favreau. Second down, honestly, from George Lucas. So I've got a lot of high expectations for this show. And from what I've seen in the trailer, it just looks fantastic. The design work looks great. One of my favorite shots in it is what looks to be Lothal and Sabine on a speeder with this amazing-looking cross between an X-Wing fighter helmet and what we saw of Poe Dameron. It's a little bit more squared off and streamlined, but there's a profile shot of her speeding down a pathway on a speeder with the E-Wing in the background. I used it for the image on this podcast for the YouTube version. No video this week. I was short on time. It takes a while to produce those. But the look of the trailer is fantastic. A lot of amazing shots. Looks to be action-filled with some new vehicles as well. So I'm going to get excited once again and hope that I am not disappointed.
The hyperdrive is leaking.
All right, let's shift gears, if you will, and go to the real world. This will be spoiler-filled for Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning. So if you don't want to be spoiled, I would pitch off now for fear of doing so. So let me get into it. I want to share with you my thoughts of a franchise that I've really come to love. Interesting franchise in as much as it follows, in my opinion, a similar trajectory to what we saw with the Fast and Furious films. In as much as its popularity and the movies got better as they went along. That being said, where the Mission Impossible franchise continued to get better and has done so, I feel like the Fast and Furious franchise has gone downhill with the last two releases. But from their inception, they share very similar storylines. Starting off with the first Mission Impossible, directed by Brian De Palma, the original Fast and Furious film. That original Fast and Furious film was a much simpler film. The second film was just okay. The third one wasn't that great, and then they started to get better from there. The Mission Impossible franchise went through something similar. The Brian De Palma film is really interesting to go back and watch when you compare them to the films that followed, and certainly the last three that have been directed by Christopher McQuarrie, along with, Tom Cruise being heavily involved. Recently did a rewatch of all the films gearing up for Dead Reckoning and was surprised at how much I actually enjoyed that original Brian De Palma Mission Impossible. Dead Reckoning has a lot of callbacks to that original movie. Now, you don't need to go watch the original Mission Impossible film to absolutely enjoy the new Mission Impossible film. However, there are some fun little Easter eggs and connections that they made, which seemed a bit surprising to me because they hadn't really gone back to that film, but they certainly wanted to draw from it. Whether it is the return of one of the Mission Impossible Force directors in Kittredge from the original film makes an appearance in the new film. One of the key villains from both Fallout and also Dead Reckoning in Vanessa Kirby, who plays the White Widow. She has a direct family connection with Max, who was attempting to buy the knock list from the original Mission Impossible film. So again, there's some connections there, and there's a backstory for Ethan Hunt that it goes all the way back to when he actually joined the IMF, which we didn't see in that original movie. So let's start off here, though, and I just want to make one more connection and expand a little bit about what I was talking about with regard to Indiana Jones and when I was mentioning Fast X and the Fast and Furious franchise. The Mission Impossible films and the Fast and Furious franchise, they're trying to do very similar things. And these last two films, absolutely so. Having seen Fast X, I liked it enough in theaters. Don't know if I'll purchase it. Don't know if I'll go watch it again. I did not watch Fast 9 a second time after seeing it in theaters, although I wasn't disappointed seeing it in theaters. Fast X attempts to go and be wildly entertaining while striking an emotional chord. And while it's kind of entertaining enough, I wasn't bored when I saw it. It's a little long. It's over-the-top ridiculous. You really can't buy into much of any of the logic that plays out in the action sequences. It attempts to be emotional, but doesn't ever really land the way that I think that they were hoping it would. Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning absolutely does. The movie delivers on the action, it delivers on the emotion, it delivers on the writing, and it delivers on the comedy. It did what Fast X was trying to do, but it absolutely succeeded in doing so. The opening of the film starts off very differently, but as a massive fan of submarine films, specifically Crimson Tide and The Hunt for Red October, the opening sequence of this Russian submarine, the Sevastopol, being tricked by what is ultimately the enemy of the film in this AI called the Entity, completely worked for me, caught me off guard. I was very curious as to why we were seeing a submarine shot in the trailer, and having this be a very different alternate opening sequence. Now, that being said, after that opening sequence of what takes place with the Sevastopol submarine, which you don't really understand its direct connection to the film, apart from knowing this is where the Cruciphon key comes into play because it comes from this submarine, which is the MacGuffin that's being chased throughout the film. We do go into a sort of typical Mission Impossible adventure opening sequence before we get to the title of the film. So it works in that regard. There was a moment at the start of the movie where I was like, we haven't seen the opening credits yet, right? Because it was going on for quite a long time. The AI enemy in and of itself, and I'm going to work through my review of this quickly, and I'm probably not going to hit all the points that I'd like to. I'm just going to share with you some of the aspects of the film that I enjoyed the most. The AI enemy I thought was interesting, and it's a tough one to play out. You have the live-action villain sort of avatar, if you will, Gabriel, who is out in the real world doing essentially the bidding of this AI entity, okay, that is virtually everywhere. And this key, we find out, is the only thing that can go and shut it down. So you do have a real-world enemy antagonist to go and play with. I don't know if everybody keyed in on this watching the film. I know that I did. They did lay it out in the movie, and I'm interested to see when my wife Melinda and my oldest son Logan come home. They're actually out seeing it right now. If they end up landing on what I landed on watching the film, but there's a lot of talk of algorithms in the movie. And the reason why the AI villain worked for me was because my own research and coverage, being a radio talk show host, into social networking and the algorithms and how how they really control so many aspects of our lives. If you've watched The Social Dilemma on Netflix, you know what I'm talking about. This all very much helped me buy into this AI enemy in the movie. That this algorithm, this AI would actually be able to manipulate and know the actions that the characters would be taking because they're so keyed into the technology. It knows their moves and advances because it knows them that well. Just like when you go online, the algorithms know who you are enough to where they can go and, on a very base level, spit out an ad of a product that you've been talking about but didn't ever type it into a computer because I just assume everything's listening to us. So on that front, it absolutely worked, and I was able to go and buy into it. It was different. I almost feel like the film was a bit ahead of its time. I imagine that if you look back at Dead Reckoning, say 5-10 years from now, it's probably going to be pretty prophetic in that regard, which is a little bit frightening. So in that respect, having this AI enemy worked for me. I found out before the film was released, because it wasn't really a secret that much, but that was going to be the case, and I was very interested to see just how this was going to work, and it did. The action sequences are just spot on. And again, comparing them to something like Fast X, a lot of it is ridiculous. You know that this can't happen. These are skilled individuals, but they're not that skilled. Be that as it may, the choreography of the action sequences just are grounded in enough reality to where you can buy into it and feel the impact of the hits and the emotion and the comedy that's taking place. Haley Atwell is just a delight to watch on screen, and her chemistry with Tom Cruise, I thought, was much better than Rebecca Ferguson, Isla, who unfortunately, again, spoiler, doesn't make it. Knew she wasn't going to make it. Her and Ethan were way too close in the film. And when we got to the scene at the nightclub and there had to be a choice, I knew somebody was going to bite it. And I kind of suspected that with how prominent Haley Atwell was playing in the trailers, and Rebecca Ferguson being such a key character from both Rogue Nation and Fallout. I wasn't hugely surprised by that and had every expectation that Haley Atwell was going to make it, and kind of knew that that Rebecca Ferguson's character was in trouble. I can see a scenario where Haley Atwell actually ends up carrying the mantle by the end of the film, joining the IMF with Kittredge. I keep saying his name oddly. I kind of see a possibility that she could end up becoming a part of the team in films beyond Dead Reckoning Part 2, because Christopher McQuarrie has said that they have other stories that in mind if they want to continue moving forward. Moving towards the end of the film, the jump that was teased so much in the trailer, we saw it so many times, and so many behind the scenes that I watched of Tom Cruise actually jumping off the mountain on his motorcycle with the parachute strapped to his back, wondering if it was going to pay off completely in the film. It did. It worked. The payoff and how he ends up getting on the train, the moment when he comes crashing through the side of the train into Grace Haley Atwell's character, it was so much fun. And one of the last things that I wanted to mention was the assassin who was played by the actress who played Mantis in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. She was fantastic as a villain. A lot of fun to watch, was a formidable opponent, and the scene in the alleyway where Ethan Hunt has to battle the two bad guys, including this female assassin, and he decides to let her live, was fantastic writing, and the payoff at the end of the film, where she is about to die, and she's the only one, apart from Gabriel, the antagonist, left who knows the location of the submarine, which is the only way to shut down the entity. That moment had me cheering. That quiet moment of her barely getting out. It reminded me of Yoda in Return of the Jedi saying, "No, there is another Skywalker." That moment of her telling Ethan, because she was the only one that knew what the key opened, saying, "Sevastopol, the submarine." And then we get the closing shot at the end of the film of the submarine lying at the bottom of the ocean under the ice. Just the pitch perfect chef's kiss closing of this part 1 in the Mission Impossible series. I give it a 10 out of 10. I have not had that much fun in the movie theater since I saw Top Gun Maverick, and I hope it's one of these movies where I really hope my wife and Logan love it as much as Kyle and I did, my youngest 16-year-old, because we both just walked out of the film buzzing. Would love to hear your thoughts on all of this, whether it's the Ahsoka trailer, Bob Iger saying they're going to slow down content for Marvel and Star Wars, or your thoughts on Dead Reckoning. Hopefully you saw it. If not, I just spoiled the daylights out of the movie for you. So email me, talkshownerd@gmail.com. Again, talkshownerd@gmail.com. I'd love to hear your thoughts between now and next week. And really quick, I only have one listener feedback from last week, and talking about R-rated Star Wars in The Rebel Moon by Zack Snyder. Again, my thoughts, my trepidation on an R-rated space opera, even though it's not Star Wars, right? Ray 2017 just writes, R-rated Star Wars, woohoo. Maybe things will finally turn up a notch. Let's go! ! So we'll wait to see. I'm no prude, and I enjoy R-rated films. I just, when it comes to space opera and so little that we get in terms of live action content beyond Star Wars. Not what I'm looking for, but I talked about that at length on last week's episode, and I don't need to get back into it this week. Thank you so much for checking out this week's My Nerd World podcast. Again, email me, talkshownerd@gmail.com. And if you want to support the show, as always, I hope you will take the time to check out my own science fiction space opera series, EMBARK. Treat yourself, a friend, or a family member with science fiction, written for adults, but great for ages 11 and older. EMBARK is available in ebook, hardcover, paperback, and audiobook. 7 books in all in the series. If you like your science fiction space opera to be epic, filled with a lot of action, space battles, ground battles, and romance, then EMBARK. A little bit of pop culture as well. EMBARK is perfect for you on Amazon.com or mynerdworld.net. You can follow a ragtag squadron of pilots and one reluctant hero on a journey of survival across the galaxy as they fight for humanity's future among the stars. So check out the series, pick up your preferred copy, and if you'd like to purchase them directly from me in paperback, I have paperback copies available that I can autograph for you at no charge. You can email me as well at talkshownerd@gmail.com, and I will show you just how simple it is to buy them from me direct. I actually shipped off some books this week. The shipping is cheap. The books are basically running about $20 a piece, and that's with shipping. And there's a bit of a discount if you buy all 7 together. So if you're interested in buying the paperbacks directly from me, again, email talkshownerd@gmail.com, and I will give you the directions on how we can work that out. So thank you so much for checking out the show. I'll talk to you again next week. I hope wherever you are happy, you're healthy, and you're safe. Bye.
The Force will be with you, always.
My Nerd World.